Okay, official and formal good evening. We have hit the record button and are about to get started. We've had our opening prayer and asked for God to be a part of our study. And so we're about to commence. Before we do, a little bit of housekeeping. This is our last live class together, but you do have one extra video that I actually got recorded today. I'm thankful to be able to report that. So I'm hoping that when we get off here, while I'm waiting for this video to be processed by Zoom, I can take that time and go ahead and upload that. And so I don't see why that can't happen, Lord willing. So we'll hopefully have that Song of Solomon video to you soon after class is over. And we will try to get the final to you shortly thereafter. But as far as deadlines are concerned, I appreciate very much, we got one assignment in and we've gotten a couple of tests in, but we remain committed to working with you with all those due dates. And so, if it's even if it's a few weeks into January, it's not going to be a big deal. I'd rather you finish and, have the opportunity to, implant the things that we're trying to teach into your hearts, the Word of God into your hearts. And so, of course, I'm going to try to be flexible to the extent that I can. So just let me know that you want to do it, and I will do my best to work with you. So we just have those two tests, and then the assignment, which if you'll remember, the assignment is kind of like it's not pick your poison, but it's pick your challenge. So you don't have to pick the hardest assignment. There are easier options and there are more difficult ones. And so I just go through there and pick what you feel would profit you, would take you a step closer to understanding this literature, and then also hopefully a step of progress in your spiritual maturity. So with that all being said, are there any questions or concerns you'd like to cover now before we get started? Okay. Oh, yep. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. We did cover the first 5 verses of Ecclesiastes 8 last time. So let's go ahead and jump in to kind of getting more towards the heart of the subject matter in Ecclesiastes 8, that wickedness exists, but is not the answer. We've seen that one of the things that, Solomon tends to fall back on in this period of his life is that problem of evil that we've been discussing. And when we use that formal term problem of evil, we're talking about the problem of the idea of a righteous, all-loving, all-powerful God allowing there to be evil in this world. You're going to see him kind of coming to his own sort of peace with that in the verses that follow. So wickedness exists, but is not the answer. All right, so let's begin reading here in chapter 8 and verse number 6. All right, so it says, "Because for every matter there is a time and judgment, though the misery of man increases greatly. For he does not know what will happen, so who can tell him when it will occur? No one has power over the spirit to retain the spirit, and no one has power in the day of death. There is no release from that war, and wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it." So there's a sort of realization on his part that, just in these verses, that yes, misery can increase. Yes, we don't have the power over our spirits to effectively say, today is the day that I'll live and today is the day that I will die. But the truth remains that wickedness, as it closes out there in verse 8, will not deliver those given to it. And then again, that question, these type of questions come up in the book from time to time. So who can tell him when it will occur? Well, not that God will tell us when it can occur, but these are the kind of reflections that bring us back to God and the fact that he knows and the fact that he is in charge. So he says in verse 9, "All this I have seen and applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun." We've been cautioning ourselves when we see under the sun to look for an earthly perspective. He's merely reflecting on what he has done at this point, not necessarily talking about a non-spiritual observation here. So he's saying, "I've applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. There is a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt." And so yes, we can attain power. Yes, power is to be respected, as we saw in those first 5 verses, but It's possible for a person through power to exalt himself in pride. Solomon did that. Many rulers do that. The saying is that heavy is the head that wears the crown, and further that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you see many of the Bible characters that have received power and authority have allowed that to get to their head in one way or the other, whether it's Solomon himself or his father David, the predecessor before the Davidic line, and Saul, and then going down in the stream of history, name a king, and you'll, for most of them, be able to point to some battle with pride that they had. And so certainly there's a lot of people who rule to their own hurt. In verse 10, then I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of holiness, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. And this is also vanity. Vanity that, they had lived their lives so, not vanity that effectively they've gotten what was coming to them, and that the pretense of holiness in their surrounds had nothing to do with them. So when you see him say, I saw the wicked buried, and who had come and gone from the place of holiness, I kind of get the picture of sort of that Psalm 73 kind of observation. If you remember Asaph, when he is troubled by the problem of evil, he considers their end. And I think this is Solomon likewise considering their end. And then verse 11, because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. And we've seen that elsewhere in wisdom literature. It's not a unique thought to this particular passage. And so, yes, it does seem that wickedness gets away with it, but there's no solution in it. There's only vanity, verse 10, and it will not deliver, verse 8. So why? Well, the third kind of major thought here is that God is going to repay wickedness. In verse number 12, and so this is the conclusion really of these previous thoughts, though a sinner does evil 100 times and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before him. Notice the change in tone and perspective when we have considered their end and we've considered the futility of what they are doing. The wicked can seemingly get away with it. They can seemingly be in control, but they come to an end. They can't retain their spirit, verse 8. They don't have power, even though they are given great amounts of leadership or control. And so ultimately, it works out for those who are in fear of God. He's building towards that conclusion where he says that the whole of man is to fear God and keep his commandments. And so already that thought is cropping up. In verse 13, but it will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear before God. Lack of fear of the wicked means that even though it will be well with those who fear God, it will never be well with those who are wicked. There is, he says in verse 14, a vanity which occurs on the earth, that there are just men to whom it happens according to the work of the wicked. Yes, it is the case that sometimes righteous people meet the same fate as the wicked, and that in observing the way that they come to an end, you might not be able to tell one story from the other. And he goes on to say again, there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. I said that this also is vanity. And so what's the vanity in that, do you think? Why is he saying that this is vanity? Is it, how do you fit that into the flow of thought here?
It sounds like a waste of time.
Sounds like it. I don't know that that's the track that he's on in this line of reasoning. So what else could he mean by saying that this is vanity? So we stated the truth in verses 12 and 13 that those who fear God, ultimately it will be well with them. Those who do not fear God, ultimately it will not be well with them. And then the conclusion, maybe we might get that in front of us so that we can use it as a tool for evaluating verse 14. You see the connective word and the concluding word, so, verse 15. So I commended enjoyment because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry, for this will remain with him in his labor all the days of his life, which God gives him under the sun. Now, that sounds a whole lot like, and becomes another verse that we add to a string of verses that we've been seeing at these moments. And we've said that all the time that these are typically hilltop type observations. Now we are going to, in stringing them all together at the end of our study, make sure that we have them differentiated in our mind from the old Epicurean kind of philosophy. You see eat, drink, and be merry, and it sounds like eat, drink, tomorrow we die kind of stuff. But I'm telling you that there's a difference in the way that Solomon uses this concept, and and I might as well just kind of pave the way, given that we are in the last night for this reflection. It seems to me that he kind of comes to this concluding thought at the end of all these different kinds of reflections, as a way of saying, yes, you can enjoy life, but you have to not be entangled by life. There's any number of different ways that you can be entangled by life. There's philosophical ways. I think that's what we're talking about here in this text. But then there's also the temptations of allowing what might be good and honest pursuits in their own way to become too much, or too much of a focus. And then, of course, there's sinful pursuits. He kind of comes to this concluding thought that, yes, you can enjoy life, but don't allow it to be the end. Don't allow it to be your primary focus. And like I said, all of these thoughts, I believe, are building to the conclusion. So with that kind of in mind, what then do you think is the vanity of verse 14?
It could be. Mostly I'm saying this because of kind of how he bookends it. There's a vanity that takes place on earth. And then he concludes, I said that this also is vanity, seems to indicate that the entire thing, right, the entire encapsulation of that is all vanity. And so maybe it's that getting wrapped up with worrying about all that sort of things is vain and pointless, right? About how much you're earning, how much you have, whether you've got what others would consider to be, a rich and fruitful life or not. That's vanity in and of itself, to be concerned with whether you're getting what you think you deserve. Maybe we could put it like that.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track there. I think that what he is declaring to be vanity is not these individuals' lives, nor is he saying that what they do is pointless. I mean, it wouldn't make any sense for him to say that, having just said that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before him. Like he's just said that. So I think that he's reminding us that you can depart from God in any number of different ways. And one of them is to reflect for too long on this kind of situation. The fact that you think about the person who's righteous, just, who is getting the lot of the wicked, and then you think about the wicked person who is being rewarded, as it were, in life as though he were righteous, and you say that just shouldn't be. I have a preaching friend, over in Iowa, and he was talking to me about a young man who, grew up in the church but is rebelling against the church, and the problem that is keeping him away from church is this problem that we're talking about right here: the idea of the righteous being punished and the wicked prospering. And he's struggling with all of this while he's living a very affluent lifestyle. He was talking to me about how this guy, he doesn't have a care in the world. He's got plenty of money. He's not sick. He, doesn't have any issues that, he's prospering, in other words. So what really is the issue? It's not that he's struggling with anything. It's that he has allowed a philosophical thing to have power over him. And that is the point that I think Solomon is identifying as vanity. You dwell on these kind of things too long without balancing them with thoughts of that produce confidence in our God, and you'll get off track. So it's not wrong to wonder. It's not wrong to ask questions, but sometimes you have to step back from the situation and view the bigger picture. I think that, like I said, verses 12 and 13 represent doing that. And so rather than getting mired in the situational, verse 14, step back and view these things in light of eternity, and then just live the life that God has given you, verse 15. Live whatever life God has given you. Embrace that. All right, so we'll like I said, we'll go on, but are there any other thoughts or questions before we do that? Okay, so again, following this and a further support of the way we're looking at all of this is a couple of praise statements about God and his wisdom. And so when I, verse 16, applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, even though one sees no sleep day or night, then I saw all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. For though a man labors to discover it, yet he will not find it. Moreover, though a wise man attempts to know it, he will not be able to find it. The effective reasoning there is what we've said all along with this problem of evil, that you will never have knowledge to eclipse God's knowledge. You'll never know more than he does. And you can spend all of your time trying to reason out some kind of better way that things could be done. And, you'll just kind of do that and die, and you'll never complete the task. So there's no pursuit that's going to find fulfillment down the track of wisdom, trying to outthink or outknow God. And so that in of itself is a reminder to keep God in his place and allow God to make those decisions. It's a different kind of way of going about it than what we see in the book of Job, but ultimately it's the same kind of idea we're seeing in the book of Job, a defense of God being right in the case of Job by what we don't know, and here for Solomon, God being right because of what we can't know, so what we can't discover. All right, so wisdom continues to be a topic in chapter 9 as we move forward here. But this time we see some wisdom in light of what has been a recurrent kind of thing as well in the chapters before, this sort of reflection upon death that at times depresses Solomon, at times stresses Solomon when he thinks about the way people are dying, who is dying, why are the wicked not dying, why are the righteous dying, and so some wisdom regarding life and death in chapter 9. In the first 3 verses, we see a little statement or a little section that I've entitled "Life Happens to Everyone." Life is the unifier. Anything can happen to anyone at any time, basically. In chapter 9 and verse 1, for I considered all this in my heart, so that I could declare it all, that the righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. People know neither love nor hatred by anything that they see before them. All things come alike to all. And so we experience things on God's timetable, on his agenda. All things come alike to all. One event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good, the clean, the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner. He who takes an oath, as he who fears an oath. And so this is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that one thing happens to all. Truly the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil. Madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. So life happens to everyone, which eventuates in death. I think that's where you're getting led with this reflection. And so is this again, you see that phrase under the sun, is this a negative thought? Perhaps a negative thought creeping in. It's hard to figure out how all of this like I said flows together, and whether or not he's still riding those roller coasters of reflection. But again, notice how this thought is already being countered and leading to a different kind of thought. So rather than rather than get caught up in this idea that, we're all going to die. Effectively, he says, you need to embrace life. You see the abbreviation there that you probably recognize, YOLO, you only live once. Nothing new is under the sun. Solomon said it first. And verse 4, but for him who is joined to all the living, there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. There is probably the equivalent English saying would be, while there's life, there's hope. I'm sure you've heard that before. And that's, basically the same thought here as verse 4. And so you find yourself in life in the state of a dog. Well, you can envy the lion over there that's dead, but there's no point. You have an opportunity that it does not. And so someone who has died, who's gone before you, has less opportunity than you do. And so verse 5, the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. And their love, their hatred, their envy have now perished. Nevermore will they have a share in anything done under the sun. Now, is this another depressive kind of statement? I don't think so. And in fact, sometimes people will ask the question, what is the state of a person who dies? What do they know about life as it continues? Sometimes I'll direct them to this verse and say that I don't believe that the person who dies actually knows anything. As romantic of a thought as it is to say, well, my departed mother or departed other family members are like looking down on me or something like that. It's not a thought that actually travels with what is revealed in the Bible. You have Solomon saying this here. You have Jesus giving a picture of the afterlife in Luke chapter 16. Rich man and Lazarus are pictured as being in the hereafter. In that picture, if you'll remember, the rich man doesn't know the situation surrounding his brothers. He thinks that they haven't responded to anything. And so he's asking for Lazarus to be sent to them so that they can have the opportunity to change. So whether they do change or don't change, he doesn't know. And further, Lazarus isn't sent. There's no ability for those who have departed to have any impact upon life as it continues here. And so the point is, you live once. If you're alive, you need to do something with it, use it in a way that is profitable. And so he goes on to then evaluate the opportunities and call people to seize them, to live in a victorious way in verses 7 through 10. So you find once again a very similar statement, as we've said, to these other statements that we have been noticing. Go, eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works. Let your garments always be white, and let your head lack no oil. And so again, very, very similar to what we've been seeing before. Embrace the lot that you've been given, do with it what you can, achieve with it what you can, and trust effectively, as we're going to see, God to fulfill the rest. He goes on to add a little bit of a further wise reflection. Verse 9, live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun, all your days of vanity, for that is your portion in life and in the labor which you perform under the sun. And you see those words, vanity, vain. And again, we struggle with this chapter a little bit because it does seem to be negative, and there are different ways that you can view it. But I think that at the end of the day, he is calling us to do as we've said he's doing with these kind of hilltop observations. Again, not be overcome by life, seize the opportunities in life, embrace what we've been given. And so I think that you'll see in what follows that even though all of this might appear to be vain, that there is purpose in it and there is potential in it. I think we're building to that thought. We haven't not yet gotten to the we're kind of coming to peace with the fact that God is in control in these chapters, 8 and 9, and we're really going to see him call us to embrace opportunity even more later. And builds up though with this statement, which again kind of counters the idea of us seeing this as just another vanity of vanity kind of statements in verse 9. He says in verse 10, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you're going. So yes, it might appear that what you're doing is vain or empty, but it's not. Do what you can with your strength and realize that there will come a time when there will be no more that you can do. So you only live once, and therefore seize the opportunity that you have been given. Now, he says that, regardless of whatever circumstance you might find yourself in, as you are behaving with strength is important, but in order to truly live in a transformative way, you have to embrace wisdom. Now, this can't be, human wisdom, because we've seen before how he has kind of lamented human wisdom and its inability to fix things and its inability to, reach satisfactory solutions and so on. And so let's see him embracing here as the chapter closes, really the wisdom of God. And this paves the way for another. Remember how we talked about chapter 7 being sort of a return to almost a proverbial structure? We're going to get back to that in chapter 10 a little bit as well. So let's though, pick up with verse 11. I returned and saw under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, but favor to men of skill. But time and chance happen to them all. Again, going back, circling to the earlier thought, life happens to everyone. Time and chance happen to everyone. We just don't know what's going to come for us. And so these are absolutely true observations. Yes, God does providentially care for the righteous, but he does so with his purposes. You can't help but notice, even when God acts miraculously, you can't help but notice in Acts 12 that even though Peter is miraculously rescued from the prison, that James is allowed to be killed. Why is James killed and why is Peter not? It has something to do with God's purposes. And you don't find that either, of those men, as far as we have any record of, didn't accept whatever was coming to them. In fact, we see the truly faithful being willing to accept what they are given. You almost see a sort of stubbornness in Paul, because at this point in Acts 21, he's actually not listening to inspired individuals like Agabus and those Christians in Tyre that had the gift of prophecy and were speaking in the Spirit and so on. But even though he's being stubborn and not listening to inspired advice, still his attitude is great when he says, stop breaking my heart. I'm ready to die. I'm ready to face whatever fate is coming to me. And that is the mark of the spiritually mature. So again, not knowing what the future holds, you just say time and chance happen to all. Again, do what I can while I can. Man does not know his time, verse 12. Like fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare, so the sons of men are snared in an evil time when it falls suddenly upon them. When are you going to die? Probably when you least expect it. There are some people who get the chance to kind of have some knowledge that they are soon to depart, but then there's a lot of people who don't wind up that way. Verse 13, this wisdom I have also seen under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with a few men in it, and a great king came against it, besieged it, built great snares around it. Now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that same poor man. But then I said, rather than as we've seen him do in the past, allow that kind of thought to derail spiritual progress, allow that kind of thought to kind of say, well, there we go. God's way is no way at all, because this poor righteous man, poor wise man didn't get remembered. He said, then I said, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised. His words are not heard. Words of the wise spoken quietly should be heard rather than the shout of ruler or of fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. So put all that together, all right, and say, yes, it's sad what has happened to this man, but wisdom is still valuable. And rather than reflect upon what's happened to this man, we need to see the value in this story of wisdom, and then realize the equal and opposite danger of, instead of embracing wisdom, choosing the path of the sinner. Because the path of the sinner and the collective of sin is what brought about the situation of this sad story in the first place. We sometimes miss that. that a lot of the evil in our world is not unknowable and untraceable. It's actually traceable back to sinful decisions. And so if we would just do it God's way, we would have a whole lot less trouble in the world around us. God's way is a way that creates peace amongst men, and a way that, if followed, would result in a very good life. And so you kind of have to, when you reflect upon the occurrences in the world, see things differently. I think about the way that Jesus embraced current events and used them to spiritual benefit in Luke 13. He talks about the Tower of Siloam falling. He talks about Pilate mingling the blood of people with their sacrifices, effectively killing people as they're going off to sacrifice. He says that some people listened to those stories and they thought, well, how sinful those people must be because these things happen to them. I can imagine another person hearing those stories and saying, well, shouldn't God protect those people going to worship him? If God can't protect those people going to worship him, then he's no God at all. And there's others who will draw all kinds of different other conclusions with that. But what was Jesus's conclusion? Does anybody remember what Jesus's conclusion was to those stories? He said it twice in Luke 13, 3 and 5. Same conclusion to both stories. See Nicholas looking at us.
All perish.
Yeah, repent or you will likewise perish. So the lesson Jesus draws from these terrible events is change your mind, be wise, seize the opportunity ahead of you. So I think you're seeing the same kind of thing coming from Solomon here. What are we going to reflect upon? What are we going to see? The story is there. But, the emphasis for Solomon was on choosing to embrace the idea of the value of wisdom in that story. And that will always be our choice whenever we interpret current events or anything that happens in our lives. We will have to choose what the emphasis is going to be. There's some people, they get a cancer diagnosis, and it just derails them. There's other people who get a cancer diagnosis and it defines them. So what's it going to be for us? And I think Solomon would have us at this point, at least in his walk, it would have us embracing the path of wisdom. Any questions or comments over chapter 9 before we go on to chapter 10? Kate, you have your digital hand up. I wonder if your microphone is not working tonight, Kate, because this is the second time I've seen your microphone you've unmuted yourself, but we're not able to hear you. At least I'm not. Can anyone hear her?
No.
So maybe if you could please type out something. Yeah, your videos come on and I can see your mouth moving, but no sound. Yeah, you can type. Yep. It'd be a long journey if she was going to try to sign out a Bible question. I would actually Joseph might be able to interpret there, but maybe it's better to just type it out. Did a sermon some time ago, just while we're waiting for that to come across, on Luke 13 and, interpreting current events like Jesus does. Here's Kate's question. She says, what about the social justice for Christian over our own safety? So what about the social justice for Christians over our safety? Can you clarify that question a little bit for me, Kate? So social justice for Christians over our own safety. So is it wise to just hide when the situations go through? Okay, so the question maybe that she's asking relates to how a Christian is meant to respond, to life-threatening events. If I'm understanding you right, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So, should we just kind of accept whatever is coming to us? Embrace the problem. We talked about Paul, and we talked about that mentality. Maybe that's where that question arose from. His being willing to face what was coming to him. I think that the answer to the question of fight or flight is not a question that has a right or wrong answer. Now, I'll give you my reasoning for that. So, Acts chapter 8. In Acts chapter 8, the persecution of Saul is now underway. Stephen has been killed, and Saul was consenting to his death. Chapter 7 concludes with saying that, or rather, chapter 8 begins with saying that. Sorry, and so Saul is persecuting the church, making havoc of the church. Chapter 8, verse 3, entering every house, dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. So, what do you do if you're a Christian and Saul is coming after you, and you see Christians going to prison? You've seen Stephen, actually being stoned to death. What do you do? Well, you find in reading forward from this point that some, in verse 4, were scattered. So some chose to actually flee from the persecution, to not allow themselves to be arrested by Saul, but to run away instead. But then you keep reading here down in verse 14. Now, when the apostles who were at Jerusalem heard this, all right, so that's all we need. That's the only detail we need. The apostles evidently stayed at Jerusalem. So you find some Christians effectively staying at Jerusalem. You find other Christians determining that they are going to run away, which was the response made in faith. And I would suggest to you that both of them were. Because when you see the Christians being, scattering, running from the problem, you find in verse 4 that they went everywhere preaching the word. They didn't stop being Christians because of the persecution. They just knew that for their faith, that they needed to pursue faithfulness elsewhere. There's nothing wrong with valuing life and trying to pursue life. It's just like, some people that are Christians, they get the cancer diagnosis and they say, well, that's it. My time has come, and they embrace death without seeking treatment. But then there are others who, they get that cancer diagnosis and they fight, and sometimes they recover totally from their illness and live further years in service to the Lord. Which way is the right way? And again, I don't know that I can answer that question for any one individual. I think people have to know, themselves and know the way, know their reasoning, and I don't know that at the end of the day, either it could be said to be wrong in any way. If you stay and fight, do you have a reason? I know the apostles aren't trying to be glorious martyrs. There's this weird thing that happens, by the way, in later church history, where people actually tried to seek a sort of immortality through martyrdom, like they actually wanted to be martyred, and were disappointed when that didn't happen. There's a few interesting little things that pop up here and there in some of those sources that have been preserved for us. And so you can choose that kind of path for the wrong reasons altogether. But sometimes people say, well, I need to make this stand. I need to fight. And maybe they have it on their heart to say something impassioned before the crowd that's trying them, or the judge, or whoever. I don't know. But there's some people who feel like, my best option here is to flee and to serve God elsewhere. So, yeah, I know that's not a satisfying answer. You'd like to say, well, one is the right thing to do, but there isn't a right thing to do in these circumstances. There's merely an evaluation of one's situation, a knowledge of self, and a pursuit of what one feels to be best. People, you can add to this. Sometimes I also tell from the book of Acts the story of Philip. So Philip is there. in Acts chapter 8 as well. And you see as the text concludes, he's preaching, man. He's going places. He goes to Samaria. He goes to, convert the Ethiopian in the desert. And he goes on this preaching tour at the close of Acts chapter 8. He goes to Azotus in chapter 8, verse 40. He passes through. He preaches in all the cities. He comes to Caesarea, and then the text stops focusing on his story. You say, well, what happened to him? Well, you skip ahead several years and several chapters also. You come to Acts chapter 21, and you find that Paul has gone to Caesarea, and he enters into the house of Philip the evangelist. So what has Philip done? Rather than being the roving evangelist, rather than being the missionary, we might call him, he settles down in Caesarea. We find that he has a house here. We find that he has 4 daughters in verse 9, so he's raised a family. And so, well, in which situation was he more faithful? And I would say that neither is a situation of him being more faithful. He has chosen a path of service wherever he has been, whether that is staying in Caesarea or traveling to various places. So that might be a lot more than what you were asking for with that question. So sorry about that, but I think it's good to to grapple with this, because I think that's what we're doing here. And so yeah, appreciate that, Kate. And yeah, thanks for your thank you in the chat box there. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump into, or will we? Yeah, let's go ahead and jump into chapter 10. We got a little bit of time before we'll take a break. Oops. Chapter 10. So again, this wrestling kind of chapter in chapter 9, which I think can be interpreted more positively than the words might read at first blush, as I've said. Either way, it paves the way towards, again, sort of this more, kind of proverbial structure where we're just thinking about wisdom and basking in, wisdom that comes from above. So wise words, I've entitled this chapter to avoid foolishness, to avoid folly. In the first 3 verses, we see comments about protecting our character. So we've concluded with the thought that one sinner destroys much good. So we don't want to choose a path of sin. The best way to not become a sinner, and the best way to not be the poor man who is forgotten, is to try to build a reputation that is based upon substantial reality. Not just one story of you delivering a city, but a lifetime of pursuing faithfulness. In verse 1, dead flies putrefy the perfumer's ointment. So you don't buy even a very nice smelling perfume if it's got dead flies floating in it, and cause it to give off a foul odor even. So the dead flies, maybe, it must be some pretty big juicy flies. I don't know what kind that they got going on over there in Solomon's, what would be you guys don't have, what department store would be the thing to stick there? But anyway, so does a little folly to one respected for wisdom and honor. Toss a bit of foolishness in the life of wisdom, and it destroys reputation. He is not a New Testament Christian, but when I read that, I think of the legacy of Ravi Zacharias, a denominational apologist. He is, known for making well-reasoned arguments for the existence of God, and yet his legacy is tainted by the way that his life came to an end. I won't go into details, if they're not needed there, but if you know the story, then it's an illustration of the point. So again, we just want to protect our character by making good choices at all times. A wise man's heart is in his right hand, a fool's in his left. So a wise person takes his heart and applies his strength to guarding it. Keep your heart with diligence, Solomon himself said to his son, remember? And so now he's saying that to us. Guard your heart with your strength. Don't allow your heart to be something that you are careless with. And this relates to so many situations. We can look at this like a proverb, right? We can say, hey, what about the person who is considering whether they should date this non-Christian? Or what about this person who is getting himself overly involved in some kind of a social club that might have him meeting at times when the saints meet. We get friendships, we get relationships, and these things have power over us. The wise person is aware of that and guards his heart with his strength. Verse 3, even when a fool walks along the way, he lacks wisdom, and he shows everyone that he is a fool. So let's not do that. Let's protect our character by guarding our walk, guarding our heart, guarding our walk. Verses 4-7, don't let your position determine your actions. If the spirit of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your post, for conciliation pacifies great offense. The behavior of others, even those in power, doesn't excuse your own behavior. We all have the unfortunate experience who are parents of saying at one time or another, do as I say, not as I do. And it's true. There's no excuse no excusing behavior based upon the fact that somebody else did it, even if that is a person who's above you and who is a teacher of you or a guardian of you. Don't make their mistakes, and don't use their mistakes to excuse your own behavior. In verse 5, he says, there's an evil I have seen under the sun, is an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, while the rich sit in a lowly place. I've seen it to where, people have been in positions not deserving of them. In verse 7, I have seen servants on horses, while princes walk on the ground like servants. Now, what are we getting from all of that? Well, we're getting the fact that that happens. Sometimes people get into these positions, but how does it fit into this picture? It fits into the picture of saying, again, whether you find yourself in a low position or a high position, don't allow that to define your behavior as well. So don't allow those who are over you in their behavior to define your behavior, and don't allow what situation you might find themselves. I mean, it's sad that this happens. Sometimes you wonder, why is he saying this? But you can think about it sort of in a proverbial way as well. This isn't him lamenting. This happens to the point of not believing in God anymore. He's lamenting this happening and saying effectively to us, without saying it, it happens. Don't allow that to control who you are. Don't allow the folly of something happening under the sun make you a fool. So in verses 8-10, effectively then, don't be the cause of your own undoing. And like I said, I think there's a sort of flow on here. He who digs a pit will fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall will be bitten by a serpent. He who quarries stones may be hurt by them, and he who splits wood may be endangered by it. If the axe is dull and one does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength. Wisdom brings success. Now, effectively, he's not saying don't dig pits or quarry stones or split wood or any of these kinds of things. I think the concluding thought unifies all of them. If you're going to engage in this work, the work of life, whether it's these tasks or any task, do it with your strength and apply yourself with wisdom. You might still be hurt. We've seen that already being said, but as much as is in your power, make the kind of decisions that are going to put you in the best possible situations. And I don't think, given the sort of proverbial structure that we're dealing with in these verses, I don't think the point of this is safety on construction sites. I think that the point of this is to, again, think proverbially about it, and again, apply yourself with those two things that we've seen in the preceding verses, or the verses come before, the idea of strength and the idea of wisdom, because the uncared for step is the step that can be our undoing. So take steps wisely and carefully. See that you walk, Paul would say, as not as fools, but as wise. And how? Circumspectly. Some versions read differently there, but circumspectly. And I like the picture of circumspectly, because circumspectly is a compound word for like circumference or circle, and then the idea of spect or seeing. Paul says, walk with an awareness of what is happening all around you. And again, that relates to who is watching, what you're trying to achieve, and ultimately your spiritual goals. So make decisions with that in mind. All right, so maybe that would be a good time, now that we've crept over our 30-minute mark, to pause and take our break. So we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and jump back into the text here. And if you have any questions, feel free to write them down or whatever, and we'll revisit them when we start up again. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay, and we are back, and I'm going to be picking up now Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 11. So if we can, there we go. So in light of foolishness, and in light of its power to be the cause of our undoing, the topic turns to the tongue. In verse 11, the serpent may bite when it is not charmed. The babbler is no different. And so again, snakes can be brought under control, and so can your tongue. But an uncontrolled snake and a uncontrolled tongue have a lot in common. But the problem with the tongue that's uncontrolled is that it doesn't just bite those around it; it bites itself effectively. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool shall swallow him up. And swallow them up, as we again draw the image from verse 11, with poison, with destruction. In verse 13, the words of his mouth begin with foolishness. The end of his talk is raving madness. And so from beginning to end, a person who doesn't structure his speech with God's wisdom is going to find the end product being of no, not only of no value, but of negative value. You read a statement like that, and you say, now hang on, there are people who are of the world that do occasionally say wise things. But in what way is this statement true even of those who are in the world and do say wise things? In what way does it begin with foolishness and end with raving madness?
There was a radio host that would open the opening monologue would say, his worldly wisdom or worldly experience. But to me, he was a wine connoisseur, he traveled a lot, all that kind of thing, that kind of wisdom. But
yep,
it's not a godly wisdom.
No. And so there's the appearance of wisdom at times where there actually isn't wisdom. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But my kind of thoughts as I'm reading that are as follows, that, sometimes it's like, I don't know how often it happens in New Zealand, but increasingly there are congregations of the Churches of Christ that are giving up on the concept of trying to be the Lord's New Testament church, and are embracing becoming denominational in their ways, and in their, and even in the way that they're viewing themselves in the world. They identify as another denomination and that kind of thing. And, all the time while that happens, I just, kind of wish, guys, just please get out of our way. I love being able to say, that most of the Churches of Christ are on this path of restoring New Testament practices and teachings. I love being able to say that. And I hate that the devil is beginning to turn these groups away from that. And then, they're still saying that, that they're the Lord's church and that kind of thing occasionally. And then there's also, unfortunately, some good and right things that they're saying. And what I'm saying with all this is that, you wish that the devil would just be open, transparent, and honest from the beginning. And yet he's not. And you find that there are people who mingle truth and error. And at the end of the day, Solomon's evaluation of such people is still true. How? Well, because when you mingle truth and error, what happens? Does a fountain send forth at the same place both bitter and sweet? James asks. And the answer he expects is no. And so whatever might be good about what these people are saying is undone by the bad that they're saying. And in fact, it's actually even worse that they're saying some things that are kind of good, right? Like I said, I just wish that they'd just be open and honest and just give up, the claims to what they are and, who they are, and just adopt a denominational name and identify that as that to the community, because what you're doing by mingling something of the good in with a lot of the bad is you're tainting the entire picture, and you're derailing opportunities for souls to come to know the truth. So that's what Satan does. He doesn't always operate in full lies. He sometimes operates in half truths, and the half truth has the same impact as the full lie. So it might not be that it is as it appears in verse 13, just beginning with foolishness and ending with raving madness, but really that's what it is, and that's where it ends. So I can think about what I'm doing is I'm kind of thinking about that statement sort of proverbially and saying, yeah, I mean, it's true that a little bit of evil undoes a whole lot of good, and that's something that he's been saying earlier too. But verse 14, a fool also multiplies words. No man knows what is to be. Who can tell him what will be after him? It should be that we are allowing speech to be, because of course the answer to that question is God, right? And so it should be that we are allowing our speech to be modified by and guided by God. The labor of fools wearies them. They do not even know how to go to the city. They don't know where they're trying to go. People live rudderless lives, and that's reflected in their speech, and that's reflected in where they ultimately end up. So control, when I think about that last statement and how it fits in with the previous ones, I think about James, saying that the man who can control his tongue, what did he say? The man who can control his tongue is a perfect man, able to bridle also the whole body. The man who bridles his tongue can bridle the whole body. Sometimes people look at that and say, oh, he must be kind of just like throwing up his arms and giving up on the whole thing. But no, I actually think that he's telling you the relationship between the control of one's speech and the control of one's life. You work on controlling what you say, and you watch how your life falls in line as well. It's a cornerstone battle. You win the battle of the tongue, and you're going to win a lot of other battles in life too. Wisdom, ultimately, as the chapter comes to a close, brings blessings. Verse 16, woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and when your princes feast in the morning, when you find a lack of wisdom on the throne, and when you find self-indulgent people in authority. Blessed are you, O land, when your king is the son of nobles, and your princes feast at the proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. And so people are not self-indulgent. And and you can think about that proverbially too. People, we need to grow in wisdom and act with nobility. Those in Berea were more noble than those in Thessalonica. The word for noble there actually relates to their birthing, in some of its applications in contemporary literature. And so it's interesting, right? They behaved in a noble way, and in a way befitting a good birthing. And spiritually speaking, we show our good birthing by doing things like the Bereans did, searching the scriptures daily. And so let's behave with nobility, and let's not be overtaken by self-indulgence. In verse 18, because of laziness, the building decays, and through idleness of hands, the house leaks. So industry is important. A feast is made for laughter, and wine makes merry. Money answers everything. Well, does it? These are mentalities that we can have very easily. And I think that thinking about them again, proverbially, reflects upon their shortcomings. Wine makes merry, but does it? A feast is made for laughter, but does it always bring that? And so plenty of people eat themselves into sorrow, drink themselves into sorrow, and spend themselves into sorrow. And again, think proverbially in this section rather than simply seeing these statements as more of depressive statements from Solomon. Verse 20, do not curse the king even in your thought. Do not curse the rich even in your bedroom, for a bird of the air may carry your voice, and a bird in flight may tell the matter. And so beware of any of your speech, any of your behavior, and the ability of that to come back to you. And so what's the line of thinking here? It's just very much, like I said, proverbial structure that follows sort of the hilltop reflections. And we saw it in chapter 7. We're seeing it here, but we're getting more and more targeted as we move into this next chapter towards to kind of the point. So before, we don't know the future, and we've been seeing him say over and over again, just live the life that God gives you. But living the life that God gives you doesn't mean that you don't behave in a way that's purposeful. And so there's some thoughts here in chapter 11 about the importance of sowing and reaping. Illustrations begin in this text that teach us the value of preparation and diligent work in relation to the future. Verse 1, cast your bread upon waters, for you will find it after many days. Someone interpret that for me. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. And you can to guide you in your thoughts there. If you know anything about Egypt and the way that they used to practice agriculture, you can that might give you the kind of solution here. So because normally, you cast, if you're picturing with that statement the man with a loaf of bread feeding the ducks, you're saying that's not going to work, right? You cast a loaf of bread out for the ducks, and you're not going to find it later on. We're thinking more along the lines of the way that the Egyptians used to do their planting. Nobody knows offhand that it might take a little while for you to to do some research there, but so the Nile River reliably floods, and the kind of the major dynasty changes in Egyptian history often coincide with there being some kind of lack of reliability in the Nile. Because and that it's interesting how one's weather and one's experience paves the way for one's view of the world. You find a much more ordered kind of system of religion and less chaotic in Egypt, and of course all of this is without God and His way, but still much more ordered and reasonable there than you find in, for example, the deities of Babylon and Assyria, where the rivers are chaotic and flood unpredictably. But anyway, Nile comes up, and what happens is that the Egyptians would do something very counterintuitive. They would cast their seed grain, not their bread like loaves of bread, but like seed grain, on these waters, because what would happen is, as the Nile would then recede, the seed would of course take root, and then you have further crops. So the step in wisdom here effectively is to do something that at times seems sacrificial and counterintuitive for greater future gain. There is incredible value in restraint and foresight, and in acting in light of the future. This is a value that Jesus teaches, right? When he talks about the parables relative to his coming in Matthew 25. He tells us to act in light of the future. You knew I was a hard master, he says in that parable. The master says to the servant who did not act, you knew I was a hard man, and so you should have done something. And of course, the 5 foolish virgins who don't prepare adequately for the events of the night, And so act when you can, because there comes a time again when you can't. We've seen that already in Ecclesiastes as well. Give a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be upon the earth. And that's obviously, something gets a little lost in translation with that first part there. But again, it's the same kind of thought of acting towards the future. I almost wonder if it's something akin to a stitch in time saves 9. Have you ever heard that one before? So you sow a small tear early, and if you don't, then you'll have to sew that same hole up with 9 stitches, right? So a stitch in time saves 9. Yeah. So something like that. You don't know what the future holds, and so the time is now to act. In verse 3, if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall lie. What's the point of those reflections? Well, some things are predictable and knowable. You see the clouds, you can predict that at some point they're going to empty themselves. But there are some times where something falls and it's not, in other words, there's times where things happen and the opportunity to do anything about it is gone. The tree falls and it's where it's going to be. Obviously, someone can come along and cut it up into logs. That's not in picture here. The idea is that the tree had its opportunity. It has no more opportunity. And so there comes a time when we have no opportunity. He who observes the wind will not sow. The farmer who's watching and just waiting for the perfect conditions is not going to act. He who regards the clouds will not reap. So you're waiting for the perfect conditions either to sow or to reap, and you'll find that you'll never get them. And that is the case in life. I caution you as a Christian from it's okay to have future plans, but don't make your future plans the only ones that involve faithfulness. Someone will say, I'm going to work for this many years so that I can pave the way for a retirement where I'm going to really get into serving God. I hope you use your retirement to serve God, but to think that you're going to be able to exclude yourself from service now in the hopes of future service is to not behave in a very wise way toward the present. The road to hell, another one of our sayings, is paved with good intentions, isn't it? We intend to do something at some point in the future, but God says, why are we not acting now? What we do with our little is indicative of what we will do with more. If we are not using the little time we might have available now in service to God, when God gives us more, it is going to be very easy to not use it in his service as well. In continuing, we get a little bit of explanation of this line of thinking in verses 5 and 6, I believe. So in verse 5, as you do not know what is the way of the wind or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you do not know the works of God who makes everything. You don't know God's purpose and what he has in mind and store for your life. And in the evening, therefore, sow your seed, or rather in the morning, sow your seed. And in the evening, do not withhold your hand. Whatever time or place you find yourself in, now is the time to act. You can almost hear Paul saying in Romans 13 or 2 Corinthians, there's a couple of times where he says something similar to this, but behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. And it is. Now is the opportunity. Now is the only opportunity that you have. You don't know that you'll have a future one. And so use it. He says, you do not know which will prosper, either this or that, or whether both alike will be good. So it's best to act at all times. And then obviously, then you're not riding on one thing or the other. The application then, you got illustration, explanation, application. This is almost like an expository sermon. But the application of these thoughts is the need to prepare for judgment. And already, again, we're really getting to a climax with these spiritual thoughts. In verse 7, truly, the light is sweet and it is pleasant to the eyes to behold the sun. It's wonderful to live For most people, they find that. But if a man lives many years and rejoices in them all, and yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. For that, all that is coming is vanity. And so remember that this life comes to an end. And when he says all that is coming is vanity, doesn't mean that the hereafter, the prospect of eternity is vanity. It means that again, casting hopes upon future times without keeping eternity in your mind is always going to be fruitless. He's saying the same kind of thing several different ways. So verse 9, rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. So there's a little bit of maybe reverse psychology on display there in verse 9. Live in the way that seems best to you, but then at the end of the day, realize you're going to be judged for it. And so the encouragement really is in verse 10, therefore remove sorrow from your heart, put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. Don't allow age to be an excuse, right? Let no one despise your youth, Paul tells Timothy, but be instead an example of the believers. Don't embrace youth, embrace being a believer. And we can say, oh well, you only live once, and just enjoy yourself while you can, that kind of thing. But that's not the way that a Christian thinks. We always live with eternity in mind. So questions over chapter 11 or anything that we've discussed so far? I didn't actually start when we got started here with any questions you might have had on any previous material. But any questions before we jump right into chapter 12? Comments? Well, we're coming to the close, and one of my favorite little sections of Ecclesiastes, because of the both its message and the beauty of its poetry. The encouragement of chapter 12 is to realize that now is the time to obey God. We've been kind of building to that thought and the importance of making that decision to obey God. So obey God while you can is what I've called these first 7 verses, and while you can, on the basis of not just of the unknowable death, but the knowable future that the majority of us will face. In other words, obey while you are young, because you're going to get old, is what he's describing here in these first 7 verses. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth. Now, there's some people who read that and immediately they start to kind of zone out. We've got a lesson for the teenagers here. But what I like to remind us of as we read these verses is that today you are younger than you will be tomorrow, right? Today is the day of your youth, relatively speaking. And so I think you have to read this and other passages like this with that in mind. The Bible is never good for somebody else. I'm not saying it's not good for somebody else. I'm saying don't approach the Bible with the attitude that this part of the Bible is good for somebody else and not for you. There is something to be gained in Scripture for you, I promise, if you'll sit down and reflect upon it. It might be a proverbial kind of observation, but it is surprising how often there's relevance in passages that we would put off towards other people for us. So remember now your Creator in the days of your youth. Why? Because difficult days are coming. All right. Before the difficult days come and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. There are people who, because of the experience of aging, they wake up in the morning and life just isn't fun. They are suffering from pains that can't be fixed with medicine. I talked to any number of older Christians and about their kind of daily experience, and what do? You go from one doctor's appointment to the next, and in none of these is there ever any real solution. You're taking medicines to balance and counteract the effects of other medicines, which are designed to attack certain problems that you're having, but it seems like you fixed the one problem and you've created 2 others, and it's just not enjoyable. There's people who really find themselves in that Paul situation of Philippians 1, they find themselves in a strait betwixt two, and they just have that desire to depart. They realize that while they're here, they have a sense, that there's purpose in it and that God has a reason for it. But at the same time, they're at comfort with the idea of leaving because they just don't find life pleasurable. They just don't have the experience that they had when they were younger. And then there's this, like I said, this poetic description, this beautiful poetic description of old age. While the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain. Clouds not return after the rain? Moon darkened? Well, what happens as we get older? Common experience is that our eyesight fails us. And the idea of kind of cloudy vision, and not being able to see things very clearly would have been an experience of a lot of older people in the time of Solomon. We're blessed, obviously from time when I was like 8 years old, I've been wearing glasses, but for some people, they only get this experience when they get older, and then in previous societies, there weren't any glasses. And so think about eyesight failure, think about cataracts and the effect of that. That's what Solomon is picturing here. In the days when, verse 3, the keepers of the house tremble, the keepers of our physical frame, the things that we take care of our body with are our hands. And yet, as some people age, Parkinson's, different kind of ailments, their hands start to shake. The strong men bow down. The strong men are probably a picture of your legs, and your legs, you can't straighten them like you used to. You just kind of walk kind of bent over. He says, when the grinders cease because they are few, you don't have a lot of teeth as you get older. We have dentures, we have all kinds of things that kind of make old age, or are designed to make old age a little bit more pleasurable, but all these things are still happening. So we still have these experiences. The grinders cease because they are few. Those that look through the windows grow dim. Again, probably a reference to eyesight, possibly, a reference to just that feeling of not being able to seize or to do or to act. When the doors are shut in the streets, it's very hard for older people to get out sometimes. We have this phrase that we refer to certain church members with called shut in. And that is the experience of a lot of older Christians. They are shut in, and a lot of older people for that matter. So the doors are shut in the streets. The sound of the grinding is low. You don't eat very much as you get older. Meals are small, and sometimes you can miss a meal and it doesn't bother you. When one rises up at the sound of the bird, we had a brother ask us this yesterday morning if we could please pray that he could get some sleep. He just couldn't get any sleep. And so, you wake up at the smallest noise as you get older, and yet you wake up at the sound of a bird, and yet your hearing fails. All the daughters of music are brought low. You have trouble hearing things as you get older. Then verse 5, they are afraid of height, going downstairs, navigating, maybe a hiking trail that you used to conquer in your youth becomes difficult. Tears in the way. I have little kids that run all over the place, and we have a lot of little kids that run all over the place, and I can see at times the fear on my older brothers and sisters' faces as they see those kids running all over the place, fearful that somebody's going to knock into them. And for them, that can be life altering. You're walking along, somebody knocks into you, you fall down, and that's it. You might break your hip and never get out of the hospital. And so tears in the way. When the almond tree blossoms, an almond tree in blossom is white. And so we're talking about white hair, probably. The grasshopper is a burden. It's very hard to lift up something very light when you get old. Desire fails. We've talked about that, how there just is this internal desire not to do very much. 4, man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the street. So we're building up toward the idea of dying here. And so you're going to die at some point. Therefore, verse 6, remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed. What is the silver cord? Possibly, a picture of life itself, possibly a picture of the spine, and that going up, our back, and just the back just gives way. The golden bowl is broken. Maybe that's a picture of the mind, and how some people die having fought a long battle with dementia. The pitcher is shattered at the fountain. Maybe that's a picture of the heart. The heart fails. The wheel broken at the well. Maybe that's a picture of either the heart or the lungs. So these things that pump and circulate and move things in us just stop doing that. In verse 7, then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to the God who gave it. Remember before, we saw that, Solomon sang in chapter 3, the beast dies and we die. And but yet even then he's like, they go down and we go up. But here he allows himself to actually say where we go. We return to God, the one who created us in the first place. And so he concludes by saying, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. All is vanity in what way? Well, in ways that don't honor, I think, that last idea. It's not vanity to return to God. It's vanity to not be prepared to return to God, because you can't escape this fate. And the fact is that some of us are going to die long before any of this happens, right? So either through that or through this, we're going to be gone. You see all the more reason to remember now your Creator in the days of your youth. Moreover, because the preacher was wise, he's probably talking about himself, he still taught the people knowledge as he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. And so even as he's writing all these things and teaching all these things, the preacher sought to find acceptable words, and what was written was upright words of truth. And through inspiration was able to give some guidance. And here's his encouragement in relation to his guidance, and both in this book and in the Proverbs, and perhaps in other things that he might have written and done in his life that God has not seen fit to preserve for us. He says, the words of the wise are like goads. They prompt us. They push us. It's hard for you, Saul was told, to kick against the pricks, to kick against those things that are goading you and pushing you in a certain direction. The words of scholars are like well-driven nails, or they should be. We should be taking these things and driving them into the wall of our lives, and acknowledging that they have been given by one shepherd, by one who's trying to guide us. And I think that the New King James does well in capitalizing that word shepherd. And maybe we saw, you'll hear me when I talk about Solomon in the Song of Solomon say how Solomon seems to love shepherding illustrations and talks in that kind of language with his spouse there in the Shulamite. So maybe we're returning to that with that last little statement there in verse 11. Further, my son, be admonished by these, of making many books there is no end. Much study is wearisome to the flesh. You can pursue all kinds of wisdom, but you got to make sure it's the right kind, because man will keep talking, but it doesn't change the reality of it all. And so the whole duty of man is what we need to ultimately be led to, and allow the voices we surround ourselves with to be guiding us toward. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. All right. Any questions or thoughts over the book of Ecclesiastes before we, do a quick casting our eyes back over the content of the book?
It's good seeing the context of what he's using as vanity, how it builds in context to the themes.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Patrick, can you explain again when you said earlier on regarding how Solomon says, eat, drink, and be merry.
Yeah,
Can you just
that's where we're
explain that
headed.
again?
That's where we're headed.
So-
So don't
Sorry?
worry. That is where we're headed. That's what I'm
Okay.
saving for last. Keep me honest, but I'll get there. I do see a chat popping up. I'm glad to study this course. It helps me to solve the confusions of what seem to be contradictory. Thank you and appreciate it. Thank you for saying that, Kate. I'm not quite done yet. We'll have a couple more things to say. So summarizing the book, I think it's helpful when you get such a, it's not that the concepts are just, there's occasions where we scratch our heads about what the actual purpose of Solomon is in saying something. But it's not at the end of the day a super long book, but it's just ideas that we aren't exposed to very often. It's helpful to cast our eyes back over and think about it a little bit. Oh, we do have another comment. Oh, chapter 12. She was talking about in particular chapter 12, and Kate was. And so, yeah, thanks for saying that, Kate. But summarizing this, I think it's good to cast our eyes back over some of the thoughts of what life with God is life without God rather is like. And so as you see, again, big picture, what life with God is like, without God, I keep saying it wrong, life without God is like, you see that there is no success or happiness. What profit is a man from all of his labor, chapter 1, verse 3, no success or happiness. There's no comforter in this situation, chapter 4, verse 1. Tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. Well, do they? If God's not in their life, then they don't, right? So no comforter. He found that he hated life, chapter 2, verse 17, hated life because of the work that was done under the sun. It was distressing to me. A lot of depression in the world around us. Everything is seen to be empty and meaningless. A lot of people come to this conclusion in the world around us, chapter 1 verse 14, all is vanity and grasping for the wind. Why? I can't fix anything, he says. Chapter 1 verse 15, what is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking can't be numbered. I can't fix anything because I can't do anything new. We've been working at this. Humanity's been working at improving life all this time. And all we do is a shoddy patch job that's found to be wanting. You think about the things that doctors do to supposedly prolong life. And you say sometimes, well, was it worth prolonging? What ends up sometimes happening with some people, I'm not saying don't pursue medicine or don't pursue medical help, because you don't know what's going to happen. And, there's value in some of those things that are done. But at the same time, sometimes what is prolonged is really suffering. And so we just don't ever get the problem fixed, do we? We're not coming any closer to the idea of being immortal. If anything, a study was done recently. I remember seeing a blurb about this somewhere that said that the average life expectancy, and this might be United States, I don't know, but the average life expectancy was actually going down. Like people are dying younger. And so it's like, we've got all this medicine and all this ingenuity, but people are dying younger. And, so again, that's where we're at. He could create no way of life greater than God's way of life. Chapter 3 and verse 14, he says, no, whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it. Nothing taken from it. So I can't undo or change anything that God has in place. And ultimately he realizes I'm mortal and I'm going to die. All will go to one place. All are the dust and all return to the dust. So that's life without God. And there's other things that we can maybe draw out to add to that picture, but I think that paints a pretty clear picture. And so I can tell you again that that's not the point of the book. The point of the book is not just to portray this depressive situation that life can be. We've seen enough information to see that there's a contrary picture. And again, a story that's being told that builds up to chapter 12. So let's talk about that story. And in talking about this, we're going to do so with 3 keys to success, as the text outlines it. 1, and this is what I've been talking about, this sort of golden thread that goes through the book. And that's me, who calls it, also known as by me, the golden thread of Ecclesiastes. And it's that we want to enjoy the world, but don't get lost in its pursuits. Notice again the repetitive nature of these statements and consider them in light of the whole rather than looking at them in isolation. So what makes it different than Epicurus? Because each of these things are said and they build to an end. All right. So chapter 2 and verse 24. Nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This I saw that is from the hand of God. Chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all of his labor. It is the gift of God. Verse 22, I perceive that nothing is better than that a man should rejoice in his works, for that is his heritage. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? Chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. The fool folds his hands and consumes his flesh. Better is a handful with quietness than both hands full together with toil and grasping for them. And that's a little bit different, but it's the same idea that when you have, taking joy in what you have rather than trying to grab more and do more and get more. Chapter 5 and verse 18. Here is what I've seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all of his labor, in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives, for it is his heritage. In verse 19, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth and given him power to eat of it, to rejoice, rather to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. You see how it's just over and over again saying basically the same thing. Chapter 6, verse 9. A little bit different, but still the same core thought. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. What you have is better than what you want. This is vanity and grasping the wind, this idea of wandering desire. Chapter 8 and verse 15. I commended enjoyment, because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, to drink, to be merry. This will remain with him in his labor all the days of his life, which God gives him under the sun. And then ultimately chapter 9, or rather finally chapter 9, verse 7, go eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works. Let your garments always be white, let your head lack no oil. Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your life, your vain life, which he gives you under the sun, all your days of vanity, for that is the portion in life and in the labor which you perform under the sun. We said that chapter 9 is a bit challenging in some of the phrasing and some of the ways he says things, but still it's the same kind of thought. And reading that over and over again, and especially reading in an isolation like that, especially in light of what he's trying to do in the book and all of the other discussions that we've noted in the book, I see him saying over and over again, just embrace what you have. I mean, obviously, we try to do more, we try to have a return on investment, so to speak. But I can tell you that times come where you will be trying to make something out of what you have, and you will end up with less, or you will end up with the same, or you'll end up with more. And if you get unduly fixated on those kinds of goals, they can ruin you, they can destroy you, they can derail you. I mean, you think about the soil that receives the word of God. What's one of the potentials in receiving the word of God? Well, allowing other plants to germinate alongside of the word of God, and then seeing those thorny plants choke out the word of God from our lives. And what are the thorns symbolic of? Jesus says it's symbolic of riches and wealth, right? And so again, the pursuits of life, they just can choke out what we're trying to do. So it's not bad to be happy in life. It's not bad to enjoy what you have. God gave it to you. As Paul says to Timothy, to tell the rich in 1 Timothy 6, God gives all things richly to enjoy. So that comes from God. Thank God for it. Be grateful for it, but don't be too attached to it, because it can be so quickly gone. And then also it can be so quickly be found to be purposeless, because you have all this wealth and then you die and it's gone, or you have all this wealth and then maybe you're Job and it's all lost through some catastrophic event. So take what you have and make the most of what you have, but don't see it as an end or a purpose in life. So number 2, this again all is leading up towards, I believe, this thought because there's all these kind of similar statements, and all of a sudden at the close of one of those similar statements, there's chapter 9 and verse 10, whatever your hand finds to do it with your might. There's no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you're going. Now he says that you're going to die, but then later he adds to that the dust will return to the earth as it was, chapter 12, verse 7. Spirit will return to God who gave it, and therefore we will be judged, for what we do. And so life is ultimately culminating with a return to God and a judgment. And so the real message in all of this is not, in seeing these repeated statements, to see in them any kind of end or fulfillment or purpose like Epicurus did. Epicurus says, eat, drink, tomorrow we die, and then nothing else. But that's not what that's not what Solomon is saying. He's saying, yes, enjoy whatever God gives you, but there is something coming thereafter. And therefore, what is the whole purpose that we must not lose sight of in all of these other things? The whole matter is, again, to fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. So yeah, I hope that now, looking at all of that in isolation and then seeing how it all leads up to the statement in chapter 12 kind of helps you to kind of maybe be at peace with those kind of statements. Does that help, Brother Joseph, or anybody else who might be wondering about those statements?
Yeah, thank you. It does.
Yeah. Okay, well, with that, that's what I had planned to do. So we got 5 minutes. You can keep me for it if you want to ask any other questions, or we can wrap up early for tonight. So any comments or questions as we close out?
You could say, learn to live life with content.
Yeah.
Don't be discontent, like always wanting more or searching for. Yeah,
I think there is definitely
be content with your lot.
There's definitely
it
a message.
Reminds me of what Paul said.
I see
what Paul says in the Philippians.
I see
whatever circumstances I'm in, I've learned to be content.
I see a lot of harmony in some of the statements that we're finding here with things that Paul says and things that the New Testament teaches us. He is a truly wise individual, and God is communicating a message ahead of its time. I mean, there is no Old Testament picture that's clearer of the idea of a judgment, is there? You would struggle. There's certainly pictures of plenty of pictures of temporal judgment in the Old Testament, but this is not temporal judgment. This is we're going to die and we're going to answer for what we do, and that is certainly a high point in Old Testament revelation, and something that is in total harmony with what the New Testament reveals, the coming time of appearing before the judgment seat of Christ. Yeah. Well, all right. I've enjoyed our time together. All good things come to an end. That's what we see in chapter 12, right? So before we the grinders cease because they're few, or any of those other kind of things happen to us, we'll wrap up our study. I hope you all will continue in your pursuits of the opportunities that are offered by Bear Valley. I'm very thankful to have been given this opportunity to be your guide through this portion of Scripture. And if I get that opportunity again, or if I don't, I just hope you'll continue in your taking this time to seriously study God's Word. And I hope it's been a profit to you, and I know it will continue to be as you continue to do it. So yeah, don't grow weary in well doing.
No, thanks, Patrick.
Yeah, no worries. All right, well, let's close out with a word of prayer. Most holy God, we praise you. You are an awesome God in helping us to see the end from the beginning. We can't see the future. We don't know what our lot has in store, or what anyone's lot has in store. We don't know how long the world will continue. We don't know when our Lord and Savior will return. And yet we're so thankful, one, for the good that you've given us, two, for Jesus, who gives us confidence in any situation and gives us hope through any situation. And three, we're thankful for the prospect of being able to meet you in judgment, not with fear, but with confidence. We thank you that we can know that we have eternal life, and that you have given us this opportunity in life to know you and to be prepared for the hereafter. Help us to gain wisdom from these things that we've talked about tonight. Help us to continue to reflect upon this beautiful book and see its wisdom for our lives. We pray, Father, that you will help us to not only take these messages to our heart, but that you'll help us to be guides to others, and help us to help the words spoken here to become like nails in so many people's spiritual walls, fastened there as they come from you. We thank you, Father, for this teaching, for this guidance you've given us, and we thank you for the time we've been able to share. We offer this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.